Ukrainian military warned that without urgent decisions, certain sections of the front may be on the verge of being breached. The enemy wants to encircle Myrnohrad, and near Huliaipole, the occupiers are looking for any gap to expand their foothold. Putin believes that through pressure and bloodshed, he can force all of Donetsk region into submission. Watch all of this next. You're watching TSN.ua News. I'm Alina Turishin. Subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Well, let's get started. And while everyone is discussing negotiations, the situation at the front is only getting worse, and in some areas, without urgent changes, it will soon become critical. This was stated by the Deputy Commander of the 3rd Army Corps, Lieutenant Colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Maxim Zhorin.
Honestly, I can't remember the enemy advancing this quickly in a long time. The issue now isn't just about losing certain settlements, but rather the significant overall improvement of the enemy's operational position across entire directions. And as for the terms of the agreement, whatever they may be, I'm certain they simply won't be honored, neither by Russia nor in terms of security guarantees from the West.
The situation in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration remains one of the most difficult along the entire front line. Across the entire Air Assault Forces Corps, reports indicate that the enemy wants to encircle Myrnohrad and is ramping up efforts almost without pause. The nature of Russian actions suggests that in the near future they may attempt to cut the land corridor between Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk, creating a threat of encirclement. The main directions of the occupiers' advance are toward Rivne and Svitli. Ukrainian airborne assault units are holding the defense and restraining the enemy in the area of Krasny Lyman, where some of the fiercest fighting is currently taking place. To the north of Myrnohrad, the Russians are trying to advance with small assault groups that move almost continuously, using FPV drones and reconnaissance drones to adjust their movements. The Ukrainian command is reinforcing the grouping of forces in the city to prevent a breakthrough on the southern outskirts. It is there that the Russians are trying to amass reserves of manpower for new attempts to advance. A soldier with the call sign Much Noise said that the area of the so-called high-rises is collapsing. The occupiers are destroying buildings, the enemy is demolishing everything that stands in their path. The operation of the FAB 3000 is clearly visible on the surveillance footage. The occupiers have already switched to a mode of total destruction, choosing the tactic of leveling everything to the ground in order to avoid getting drawn into prolonged urban battles. At the same time, the enemy was pressing on the eastern neighborhoods and managed to make some advances. The Russians' goal is to trap the city in a concrete cage, depriving Ukrainian defenders of maneuverability and the ability to hold commanding heights. The occupiers are wiping the city off the face of the earth with drone, artillery, and airstrikes. Heavy fighting is also ongoing in the Lyman direction. Operators of unmanned systems from the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade reported the elimination of 50 Russian assault troops in the Lyman direction. On Monday, November 24th, the brigade published a selection of videos on their Telegram channel emphasizing such a scale of losses for the enemy does not happen every day. And this was not a single attack on some specific group of occupiers. This is the result of the precise and persistent work of our drone operators, who methodically cleared enemy positions, leaving them no chance for a breakthrough. On the deep state map, it is visible that the gray zone near Lyman is expanding. If the occupiers gain control over the city, they will open up the possibility to strike at the logistics of the defense forces on the approaches to Sloviansk, one of the main supply and defense hubs for the entire eastern grouping. However, despite the fact that Russian troops try to demonstrate steady advances every day, this does not mean at all that they will inevitably succeed in capturing the entire Donetsk region. On November 23rd, SBS reported that one of the American officials conveyed the following assessment. Putin is convinced that he will gain control over the region sooner or later, either through negotiations or by force. Donald Trump repeated the same point. That is why the Kremlin is actively pushing the narrative of Russia's supposedly guaranteed victory, trying to pressure Ukraine and the West to agree to its demands right now. At the same time, analysts from the Institute for the Study of War emphasize that Russia's attempts to fully capture the Donetsk region could drag on for years and would require enormous human and material resources from Moscow. And most importantly, since 2022, the Russian army has still not proven that it is capable of taking large cities, especially those that are part of the so-called fortress belt of the Ukrainian defensive line, which has held since 2014. All of Russia's attempts to break through this line over the past 10 years have ended in failure. The situation remains difficult in the Huliaipole direction, in the Zaporizhzhia region. According to assessments by the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces have likely established control over the village of Zaporizhzhia in the Polohi district. At the same time, to the west of this district, the occupiers are currently unable to break through the Ukrainian defenses. The line is holding. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War draw attention to new geolocated footage published on November 24th, which indicates that Russian units entered Zaporizhzhia only more than 2.5 kilometers east of Huliaipole. According to their assessment, the Russian army is employing a three-tiered tactic. First, this involves the massive use of drones to gradually wear down the defense and disrupt the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces. Second, there are sabotage and infiltration groups that look for weak spots and try to destabilize the defensive line. And third, there are dense attacks by small assault units that advance in short bursts. Senior Lieutenant of the Defense Forces of Ukraine, callsign Alex, writes that the enemy's advance in Kupiansk and generally along the entire direction has almost completely stalled. According to the serviceman, the Russians have lost the initiative they had at the end of this summer, and the head of the communications department of the Joint Forces Group, Viktor Trehubov, emphasized on the air of the Kyiv 24 channel that the situation in the Kupiansk direction is currently developing in Ukraine's favor. According to him, Russian troops are only adjusting their own offensive timelines but have no real successes. A potential threat could only arise in the event of large-scale breakthroughs from the flanks, but such scenarios are not currently being observed. Trehubov emphasized that the Russians have not managed to carry out maneuvers either from the west or from the south of the city, so there is no reason to talk about the situation changing in the enemy's favor. He specifically noted that it is not worth amplifying Russian informational narratives or attributing victories to the enemy that do not actually exist. In 2025, the Russian army managed to advance only a fraction of a percent into Ukrainian territory, paying for it with over 200,000 killed and wounded. But even such meager gains are presented by Putin as proof of inevitable victory, convincing himself and those around him that Ukraine will eventually capitulate, either at the negotiating table or under the pressure of arms. This was reported by the Washington Post. Western analysts emphasize that despite the Kremlin's statements, Russia is not on the verge of a strategic offensive. On the contrary, its army is bogged down in battles for a few blocks in small towns, and the front line is moving forward literally foot by foot. However, the Russian dictator stubbornly continues the war, relying on a sense of Western weakness and the exhaustion of Ukrainian forces. Former Russian diplomat Boris Bondarev explains Putin's logic. It's not about the territory itself, but about the desire to restore Russia's status as a great power and to achieve recognition of its sphere of influence into which the West is supposedly forbidden to interfere. The Washington Post explains that Russia has reduced the number of meat assaults, significantly improved its drones and counter-drone capabilities, is actively striking at the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces, making rapid maneuvering more difficult, and is advancing in small groups that are gradually gnawing away at the defenses. British expert Sam Cranny-Evans notes that the current Russian tactic is to slowly chew through the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces while simultaneously putting pressure on supply routes with drones and artillery. Michael Kaufman, one of the most authoritative analysts, describes the Russian advance as slow and bloody. According to him, Moscow was betting that the Ukrainian defense would collapse somewhere under pressure and that the Trump administration would cut off military aid to Ukraine. And it is precisely then that Russia would be able to dictate the terms. But both bets actually turned out to be wrong. Ukrainian officials also emphasize the Russians are portraying an advantage, while in reality for months they have been storming just a few streets in small towns without advancing towards strategic objectives. The analyst says that Putin is acting as if he has unlimited resources. But the fact remains, in 2025, Russia has not captured a single major Ukrainian city. And next year, Russia will face even greater pressure from sanctions, military spending, and a shortage of manpower. What do you think? How will events on the front develop further? Write your thoughts to us under this video. Stay with the Sun.ua to keep up with the most important news. Take care of yourselves and see you in the next episodes.